All right. Welcome, everybody. We are here for episode number 2.
Already been a week.
you know, and a holiday week, right? Because we had a holiday yesterday. Hope
That's right.
everybody had a good day, a good weekend. I know Chicago, it was empty. Like yesterday felt like he was like that the city was closed. There was like nobody around. It was very funny. It's somewhat weird too. So, but
That's
you know,
awesome.
it's fine.
People don't go to Chicago for Memorial Day, I guess.
And I was in one time I was in San Francisco for 4th of July, and there was absolutely nobody there
Huh,
also. And I was like, oh, I guess those are the places you want to go on during the holidays.
that is good to know.
Yep.
Well, I know last time we talked, I left with a question on why do we tell people at work to be professional and not respectful?
hmm
And I have my own perception of that, but I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this, throughout the week. And if to me it was very clear at one point that the things that are considered professional, right? Like are very toned down versions of anybody or a very um, standardized way to do things, right? So, for example, and they very much um, they support a man world, right? So, for example, for women, the amount of you can't wear this, you can't have your hair like that, you can't have like the clothes. Where are professional clothes? There are clothes that I wear on my profession that I wear for work, right? And they're like, well, but you're going to be too distracted. And we go into the whole thing about, that I do not want to go down that path of, so because I'm wearing something short doesn't mean that I'm asking for it or things like that, right? But I think it just kind of tries to make people just so standard, so like gray that
Mhm.
all you can focus on is at work. I think that that's what professionalism. I think that that would at some point, if somebody was, had a good intention about this, that's what they were probably going for. And respectful just means that I want to wear, I don't know, colorful clothes today. And I want to do, and you're respectful of my choices of that, right? Like I'm not interfering with your job. I'm not interfering with your progress or anything. And I don't understand why those things can't be done. That's my 2 cents on that, I guess.
So your perception of professionalism is to make us all the same, so we focus
Correct.
on work, while
Yeah.
respect is being who you are, but treating people civilly.
Correct. With
Okay.
respect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that professionalism is a term that is used. I think probably similar to you. I think of it as a term that people don't really question what it means when it aligns with them.
Correct.
So I think it is something that it's a set of behaviors that are normalized to say this is what a professional is and it fits what their ideal worker image is. And that ideal worker image only includes a few people. So we know from decades of research, for example, the ideal worker image, that is a term that is used to refer to, it's usually a man, because the ideal worker doesn't need to take time off to have a baby, right? And
Correct.
other things. So, but I think that happens with a lot. It happens with the ideal worker is someone who's, like you said, all doesn't question it, very obedient, all the same, maybe that gray, not the color. But I think while you have the alternative of, okay, if we don't use professionalism, then it's all chaos, right? Like we ran into last week. Like if people
Yeah.
are authentic, it'll be chaos. And it's not either or. I think professionalism, we can make more wiggle room for people to be who they are and maybe bring more to the table than we realize they have if everyone's the same,
Yes.
because homogenous teams do not perform as well as heterogeneous ones.
Yeah.
But we still want to be respectful And
Yes.
respect varies by culture. I made a video last night about how, an American is living in Germany, and they were talking about how, like, the German stare, they're not used to it. Because in Germany, like, prolonged eye contact is very normal. But in
Yes.
America, it's like, why are you looking at me
What
like
are
that?
you doing?
And if you're in certain parts of America, you might get into some fights over it. But, what is respectful is defined by your culture. And when we don't recognize that people come from different cultures and they bring those to work, there's no way we don't bring those to work. It's part of who we are. When we
Yeah.
don't have conversations about what does respect mean to you, then we miss out on the opportunity to build a type of professionalism where a lot of people can bring who they are and their skills and their insights to the table.
Yeah. And it's funny, right? Because, and I think I mentioned this before that, I have a really long background in hospitality, and those environments it's even more intense at times of, nowadays they're being a little bit more, well, tattoos are professional or women can have these things. Back when I first started, it was very, as I said, like everybody needs to look the same. And you feel like you're the same because I remember working, and guests will come down later in the day, but like, oh, I was talking to you. I was like, no, you were not talking to me. You were talking to somebody else who were completely different than me
Mm,
physically. They were just different, but and I think that that was the idea, to make everybody look the same. In Brazil, when I worked, the hotel, it was even worse because we all had to have, if our hair uh, was below our shoulders, we had to have it on a ponytail, or it had to be pulled back. You cannot have hair in your face.
mhm.
And mind you, I'm not cooking anything. I'm just servicing people at the desk, like at the front desk. Um,
Oh, okay.
the uniforms were very, very gray. They were literally gray. They're gray with the like the neck was like all the way up here. So we all look the same. And I think that that is the idea, right? Like for you not to. And I know
Mhm,
I'm focusing a lot of like the appearance, but that translates to everything, right? If I remember there was one time, and the hotel I was working at was uh, I just don't want to say names. Well, though people can go on my LinkedIn and it doesn't matter. So it was the Grand Hyatt São Paulo, but that was back in the day because I know they have changed a lot of the rules now. But I remember I had just worked in the United States, and I work at a resort. So it was more laid back, and the vocabulary, the way we say things was different. And in Brazil, they wanted to be a little bit more strict, right?
mhm.
And more professional, I guess, more luxury. And I had this guest that came down, and I love talking to people, right? Like that's one of my favorite things to do. So I'm talking. So I would talk to the guests, like, I was talking to them when I was here in United States, and chatting with them and being very casual. And I remember one time, a supervisor didn't even talk to me directly. He spoke with somebody else to talk to me,
Hmm.
that I was too friendly with guests, that I couldn't be that casual. I needed to be more professional. And the funny thing happened after this. The same guest that he saw the interaction with wrote a letter to the general manager saying that he has never felt so welcome in any place before,
Oh,
saying that this was the best thing, that after, I don't know, if he spent 2 hours in the car, I was a breath of fresh air. And he was just so excited. And then the GM passed to somebody else, and our boss says, we need to learn from her. We all need to be like,
that's but that is great because maybe they weren't supportive of you at first, but they got the feedback,
yeah.
and it sounds like, did they make an adjustment?
They did, and I mean, at least I was able to, because I'm very comfortable speaking, right? So I don't. And this person was from the United States, and I remember making a joke because he was from Boston. I was like, "Oh, please, I do not deal with like Red Sox fans here," like, joking
Right.
with him. He's like, "Who are you?" We're all the way in Brazil. Why are you making fun?
But I think that is, you brought this up last week, that people crave authenticity.
Yes.
And I posted a clip of that on some of my business social media, and somebody commented immediately. I asked the question, like, would you prefer an authentic leader or a more traditional professional leader? And somebody commented immediately, inauthentic leaders suck. And so I think that's something that's really you tapped into, of like, people are sick of the robot. So
No,
I'm
she said
actually
the unauthentic leader sucks.
inauthentic leaders.
Oh, I thought authentic, and I was like,
No,
what?
no, no. Inauthentic leaders suck.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I actually, and I'm reading a book right now called Humor Seriously, about bringing humor to the workplace.
Okay.
And I'm not done with it yet. I'm about halfway through, and it's so fun. But one of them brought up how in 2003, Deloitte did a study on, they had complaints from customers on using too much corporate jargon, and how they intentionally designed a tool to help retrain their consultants to not use so many buzzwords,
Hmm.
and how that improved their customer relationships and set them apart as a competitor from other consulting firms.
Yeah.
So it seems that I was surprised that was in 2003, because I feel like right now we're at the point where I'm like, people don't say anything anymore. Like, it's just boil the ocean and let's circle back, and something with impact, but I'm not telling you how we're going to get there. So I know that authentic leadership is very important to you, and it seems to be where the conversation is headed. So
Yeah.
what do you want to tap into that?
Yeah, so I'm gonna first, talk about what the definition, right? So if you go online and you ask, what is authentic leadership? So authentic leadership is a management style where leaders act in a genuine, sincere way that is true to themselves, not to the company, not to their work, to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Authentic leaders are said to be able to inspire trust, loyalty, and strong performance from their employees. Um, as somebody who has always been faulted, always been very authentic, and a lot of times punished for it, as I was just, that was, in the beginning of that story, even, right? I wasn't a leader, but in the beginning of that story, I was first punished for it, right? It wasn't until they saw that there was a reason for it and there was an actual, that it was a good thing later that it became.
That your
But
performance is really high.
yeah, so it's
Mm-hmm.
like, and it goes back to, and we talked a little bit about this last time too, that we are one person, right? All the time. We're not three different people. We're not, even though people say, well, because I'm different at work than I am at home. And I usually, when I interview, I say, this is where you're going to get. I'm not going to pretend here in the interview that I am this very poised and very quiet, because I'm not, right? I have moments like that, of course, because I'm a
Right.
human being, and but that's not who I am. And I don't want you to be surprised when I start, voicing my opinion and saying what I really think. And I think that starts from the interview process, right? When people just get very good at interviewing. And so one thing that I've done when I interview people is, I want to know if the first thing that's coming through my head is like, do I want to work with this person? Right? Like, I don't ask I don't ask questions necessarily about the job, not for the for line level positions. Of course, if I'm hiring for leaders, it's a different conversation, because there are some things I need them to know. But if these are line level positions, I just want to know you are somebody that you're fun to be around. Not fun, but like that we want to be around you, right? That this is something that you're going to complement the team. Because if they come with a script, and the questions that people ask in these interviews are always the same, so they know how to answer. So when I throw them with like just a conversation, they look at me like, and that's actually, I find a lot more about them during those conversations, right? People tell me everything I want to know, why they left their last job, because they feel comfortable telling me, and I want them to tell me. Because I don't want them to sit there and be like, well, it just wasn't a good fit. Why wasn't it a good fit? Because it's different, right? Wasn't a good fit because they were making work extra hours? Wasn't a good fit because you didn't like your boss? Was it because you were not being treated with respect? Or what was the reason that made that place not a good fit? Because depending on them, I won't be able to hire you here either. Right. So I think that is
why people, it's interesting. I think I know that's why people don't bring it up, but it is also interesting that there's the other side of it's interesting the interviewer doesn't really want to know. Like they always ask the question, but they don't really want to know. Because I
always want to know, yeah.
Of responsibility of if you don't take abuse, you won't take it from me.
And
I mean, as a biopsychologist, I have, my science, we need to approach interviewing a certain way of, structured interview questions have twice the validity of unstructured. So when I have interviewed, because I agree, there is no value. Well, there is value to if someone can rehearse a script, but it's bad value. If somebody passes the interview, not because they know the job well or because they'd be a good fit, but because they know the game, that is a barrier.
Yeah.
That is saying we only want people who are similar to us, and in a way that is not job relevant. And so when I always develop structured interviews where I ask the candidates the same questions, but I really try to tap into what are the skills really needed for the job. And I always ask about behaviors, because I don't want you to just, BS me about, of course I can work on a team, right? So for example, the last time I did a lot of hiring was for a DEI role. And I asked the person I ended up hiring was like, this woman scared me because she asked me, tell me about a time that you were wrong about something DEI related. And how did you react?
And yeah, that's like sounds like you're putting them, setting them up.
We all mess up. We all mess up. And, and I want to know, how do you react to that? And another question I asked was, when was the time that you have had to advocate for somebody who does not share your identity? Because a lot of people get into work because that aligns. We all get into work because it aligns to us for some reason. But are you only going to advocate for yourself and people like you? Or do you actually have the skill set to listen to someone else's experience and to magnify, and to do what they need? And so I think there can be a blend of doing what is like best practice.
Yes.
And being authentic.
Yes.
That it doesn't have to be, as we would say in my hometown, throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
But it's funny because, you said that the question that you ask is one of the things that usually I go for, which is I would advocate for anybody. If you know what I'm saying, like not for anybody, but you know what I'm saying? Like those are my biggest hot topics at work, in the workplace, is that I'm the only one advocating for people who are not like me. You know what I'm saying? Like he's seeing those things and they're like, then it comes like, well, but they're not raising that question. I was like, yeah, because they don't feel like they can. And because I've always been very vocal and I'm comfortable being put on the spot, I'm comfortable with the confrontation, it's easier for me to take that step, which has backfired, right? Because a lot of people are like, well, I didn't really, needed you to say anything, or now that issue has been brought up and I was fine. And I was like, you were not fine, but sure, you just didn't want, no, they weren't, because they were telling me they weren't okay. So it's not like, but again, is that the whole thing about, again, going back to being authentic. Can we be authentic at work, right? Like, is it when the companies tell you, oh, we want you to be yourself, how much of myself do you actually want me to be? Or do you want me to only be my authentic professional self? How else, it gets into that.
The authentic professional is the parts of me that are similar to you, or the parts of me that you think benefit you or that you're comfortable with. Yeah. And I say that you think because again, we know there's affinity bias of that we like people who are similar to us.
Mhm.
We also know that that is a fatal flaw on a team
Yeah.
because groups of people who are identical do not perform as well. They make more mistakes. They don't
They
reach
don't
as
see
many
it, yeah.
audiences. They don't come up with new ideas because you're all the same. So
Mm.
that's why I say the parts you think you want of me, because there may be other parts of me. There are other parts of me that bring value that
Yeah,
maybe aren't in the cookie cutter
yeah.
idea. But I think on the other side of that, so we know that there's value to being authentic, but I think a lot of like we need to talk about why people aren't.
Yeah.
Um, and I think one of those reasons is people are afraid to mess up,
100%.
and
Yes. I think they're
there's
just afraid,
already
period. They're afraid.
there's this idea
Yeah.
of that a leader has to be all knowing,
Mm.
that leaders can't apologize. Like, this is from, like, decades of, like, think of, like, the
Mhm.
boss in the '80s, right? And we know we've shifted from that a little bit, but I think that that hasn't gone away. While we've shifted from, "You're not gonna yell at me," I think there is still this standard of perfectionism, which is unattainable.
Yeah.
And especially with online culture and platforms, it can seem like people are just waiting for you to make a mistake. I mean, there's the joke on the internet, the meme that goes around every now and then that's like, if you go online and say you like oranges, people will be like, "Oh, so you're saying you hate all other fruit?" Right? And oh my god, it does feel that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
So, I think if we want authenticity, we also have to have grace. And so I think part of that is not holding people accountable,
Mhm.
but for applauding leaders when they make a good decision and applauding them when they admit they did something wrong and they make an effort to rectify it.
Correct. Because and we were talking about this before we went live, that we can't learn if we don't make mistakes. And that's
Mhm.
how it is. And I know I had teams before that whenever I started the job, they would tell me, the interview process, like, well, how are you going to empower your team? I was like, first, I tell them to make mistakes because there's nothing they can do in the job, of course, that I was at, right? I'm not saying that doctors should be doing this, surgeons should be doing that. There's nothing you can do that I can't fix it,
Right.
right? Like, so there are jobs. I'm talking about
Mhm.
specific for
You
mine.
can't make mistakes as a pilot, sorry.
You see what I'm saying? So, I mean, with some grace, you can, because there is some correction there. But and I think, and of course, even in the industry, that I was in hospitality, that also is the case where there can be mistakes that I can't fix, right? I
Right.
know people think that this is a very, and it is a very easy job, but that we deal with people, and there are mistakes that you can make that can put people's life in danger. That there truly can be, right? um, so there is, but in general sense, assuming that I hire the right people, assuming that they have common sense, there is no mistake, technical mistakes that you can make that I can't fix. So let's go from there. There's no technical mistakes in this industry that you can make that I can't fix it. And pushing them to do it, right? We can't expect people to know everything or to, and at the same time feel empowered, because they won't. um, I was thinking about this earlier today. I actually did a story on that on my Instagram, and I invited people to do one thing that they feel very embarrassed of doing this
Hmm.
week, you know and like, I still feel embarrassed to be recording in public. I'm always like watching to see if people are like looking at me, and it is embarrassing. It is, right? It's, you're
Right.
looking at a camera. You don't want, but these are strangers, but you can only overcome those fears,
By doing them.
making mistakes, if you make them, right?
Mhm.
And so I challenge everybody, all the followers, to do one thing that makes you embarrassed, and do it embarrassed. Do it with the feeling of embarrassment. Don't expect that you're not going to feel bad. Like, sit on that feeling of embarrassment and be like, oh, this is so cringy and I can't believe I'm doing this. But do it, right? Like, do it. A lot of people don't record themselves. They don't go after the things that they want because they're afraid. and then you're embarrassed. Those are the two things that are going to stop it. I say that I actually understood that. I think embarrassment a lot of times make you stop more than the others. But the beauty about these two even fear, the beauty about those two feelings is that the emotion feeling, they point out to something that is very important to you. Because if it's so important to you that you're afraid of what people are going to say, because you're afraid that that's going to affect this thing that is very important to you, that means that that is something that is worth doing. So I think it points it to the right direction. It points it to the thing that you have to do.
I love that.
Right? Because I mean, there's things that yeah, because I don't care if I don't care about something, I don't care what your opinion about it. I don't care what you're going to say. But if I care about it, I do care about what you're going to say. Right. Like, so, and I think but the fear of that feedback, the fear of being called out on it, the fear of just embarrassment, being called like that you were wrong, does steer a lot of people away from being authentic, from having their voice. And not just in the workplace, but in life in general. If you hear anybody that has ever been successful at anything, they would say the same thing. You have to be yourself. Your superpower is your authenticity, is the things that make you, and I was telling you this earlier too, but it feels like now I understand that a lot of the things that I was embarrassed of saying about myself, or just are things that make me these are things that are soft skills and life skills that I have that a lot of people don't have. And they make me better for it. They make the people around me better for it because I can teach them.
And I think, and that maybe it's also because since those things are unique to you, they feel embarrassing because they feel wrong because you don't see other people do them. But that is also, so something that a pet peeve I have is, there's so much leadership content out there, and there's so much.
God. That's why I stopped posting so much, because it's like, oh, this is terrible.
People who listen to it, but they don't apply it. And it's like I'm like, what is this, like the leadership podcast crew that doesn't do anything? And I say on our leadership podcast, but we're doing things, right? And
no, it's not a leadership podcast. It's a workplace podcast.
True. But I think it is so frustrating to me, like, to listen to these, like, usually a lot of them are buzzwords too. Like, you got to go in there and make an impact and da 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 da. But we lose sight of the how. Yeah. And it's we're very resistant. Humans by nature, we're very resistant to change. We see this with leadership as well. And, we have these new ideas that come up, and people are, oh, well, we're not going to do that. Nobody's doing that yet. By definition, then you will not be a leader in this, because to be a leader, you have to take the first step. So if you're not taking risks, if you're not trying new things, you're not leading
to begin with. Yeah, you're not even a leader. Yeah, it's so funny. You said, because I just told you I changed. I have a new keynote now, right? And the keynote is actually that, which is very funny.
I didn't know that.
I know you didn't, because I just did it. And it's going from thought to action, right? It's how do you act? Why is it? Because knowledge will not make you. So knowledge does not translate into action, right? It doesn't. I can read, and we all know this. I can read any book on anything, but if I don't apply that, it means absolutely nothing, right? Like, I can learn about, I don't know. Actually, I have a better example. There's no amount of meal prep that is going to make you eat right.
Right. Yeah.
No amount of meal prep. There's no amount of gym exercises that I know of that is going to make me exercise, like going to make my body look the way I want it to look. So knowing things is very different than applying things. And why is it that we don't apply the knowledge? I actually posted, I think yesterday, knowledge is power when applied.
Mhm.
Because otherwise you just know these things, but you're not actually doing anything. So how do you go about taking this? What drives that, right?
And I think
And
we can do it in some areas of our lives and not others. It's not all
yeah,
or nothing. I
yes.
think I'm good at applying knowledge when it comes to my work, but I'm not good at applying it when it comes to, my therapist telling me that I need to actually take a break. I'm like, I know I need to take a break. I can tell
Oh,
you all
I
the benefits of taking a break. I can tell you how it would improve my work if I took a break. But am I actually going to take a break?
yeah.
Too often I have not done it till I've either been hospitalized, completely burnt out, and needed like a month off, which of course I've only been able to do once in my life, right? So I think, I agree with you. I'm just thinking for the listener, like the automatic human response is think of all the
Oh,
places
yeah.
you do these things. And you're like, oh, I do it. I'm good. Check the box. But like I challenge you to think of those parts of your life, even if it's not work related, even if it's personal, if you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's where I or
And
oh, that's
and
where I
the,
don't.
and the thing is, we need to stop, and it goes all back to, being liked and being, not wanting to be penalized,
Mm-hmm.
because there is this sense that everything I do needs to have the perfect outcome, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Perfect. There we are again with
yeah,
perfectionism.
it has to have like this perfect outcome that every decision. So I'll give a very, very good example. So I walk every day. So I'm walking, and I decided, I was like, I wonder, I'm gonna take this route today, right? Instead of the route that I do every day. And I was like, and then your brain goes like, well, I wonder why I did that. Was there anything? What is it going to change? Was there anything that was going to happen in the other route, or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is, right? Like, why did I want to do it? And I was like, maybe nothing. Maybe it's just me going a different route.
Wish them the
It
same.
does Everything doesn't have to have a meaning. And like, do I believe there is? 100%. Do I think that it is what we think it is? Right. So
Right.
I
Or
think
that
that
you have to know in that moment. Yeah.
correct. Because if I hadn't taken that route, I have that thought at that time, nothing happened on that. But it created this thought of me knowing this. So sometimes we think that we're not succeeding, or we're not doing things, or that we can't take action because we don't really know the outcome is not going to be what we want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But it truly doesn't matter. It's taking the action to take the action, regardless of the end. So the one way that I inspire people to take action on their lives, right? Which that's the whole thing, is you have to let go of the outcome. Once you just do it to do it, you just do it because you want to do it. I want to post a picture of my dog, not because I want 30,000 likes, but because I want to post, because I want to share that with somebody and I want to post. So if you focus on the actual activity of doing it and
Mm-hmm.
not the outcomes, if they're positive, negative, just the activity, because we try to oversee every single thing that is going to happen after that. Because that's our brain, right? Like we're just trying to figure it out so we can be safe and try to do the least amount of effort and all of that we know that our brain does, right? It likes conformity, it likes to not conform, but it likes what do you say, habitual, and it likes those
It likes
things.
to conserve energy.
Yeah. So, but how do we do that? Like without sacrificing life experience.
Well,
You
and
know,
it's
like,
hard to work as well because everything is outcomes driven, and
yes,
we don't want to
yes.
not meet our outcomes. But I
That's
think,
where authentic leadership comes from. If you allow people to just be themselves,
well, I think
you
that
can
there
just
is
do it.
there is a body of research showing that outcomes, it doesn't have to be either or. Again, is that it doesn't have to be that you don't have a goal. It doesn't have to be that there's not a mark. But the process matters as well. If your
Yes.
goal is X amount of sales or your goal is X amount of customer satisfaction, but the process is so terrible that you lose all of your employees in the meantime, it could even be counterproductive to that outcome of like, are people going to happily greet your customers if they're miserable?
Yeah.
Are they going to be their best selves and sell the product excitedly if they're
And
burned out?
generate more leads and all of that. Yeah.
Right. So it's just
Yeah.
it's not one or the other. And I think that we've talked about both of those. We talked about the themes of what we both talk about a lot. I talk
Yeah.
about either or mentalities, and you talk about, authenticity. And I think it all
I can
applies here of, on the one end, people are tired of the robot corporate jargon. It does not work. Customers don't like it. Workers don't
No,
like it. And I don't think
no.
the person doing it likes it,
Who?
right? The person being the robotic, right? It's
Oh
not.
no, because and to be honest, I don't know that because I do have people who have told me before because they like what is expected of them. They like that they know
Mm,
what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. So I think in that sense, when you have some type of standard, that's okay, right? Because I like to have some guidelines that I can follow. Okay, this is appropriate, this is not appropriate, right? Like this is appropriate, I think is not the right word, but like this is okay to do it, this is not okay to do it, right? Like this
mhm,
is, so I do like that. I like having that because, and it might help in a place where you do have different cultures and different backgrounds, right? So we're not like, listen, I man,
I think it
I
depends
was
on
at
what
a,
it is. I think
yeah,
if
but like I was in an interview one time, like the fact that you can't ask, right? Like if they're
mhm,
pregnant or whatever those things is. But because oh my gosh, I was in an interview one time. It was me, the general manager, we're interviewing a candidate. And the general manager was the stereotypical white male. And he turns to this person and says, I detect an accent. Where are you from? And I just stare him down. And he's like, well, because I have an accent too, so I can ask you that question. I was like, no, you can't.
mm,
It doesn't matter if you have it. So having those things, I think they are important, like in the sense, having some type of guidelines, right? Like there are
mhm.
things that we don't say, but you can't be authentic within those guidelines.
I agree. So
You
I
know?
think I was talking about like corporate jargon, like saying, you know, boil the ocean, circle back, impact. Like when
Oh, yeah.
when you think of like the generic, like Chat GPT spat it out
Yes.
on
No, we
what
don't
is
want to do that.
response to
Mm-mm.
any problem. That's
Yeah.
what I mean by clients don't like it. I talked about the Deloitte
Yeah.
case
Yeah.
study where they had to change that because customers were like, it just sounds like BS.
Yeah.
They actually called it the bull detector, the tool they developed to
That's
try to
so fun.
mitigate that. Yeah, I mean, like that was actual feedback they got from customers, and the workers don't like it because they aren't getting the feedback, and then they don't know what is yes or no. What is, like you said, there's no guidelines for people to follow. It's not even for leaders. There's no guidelines for your followers if it's just the same jargon all the time. But I think there absolutely has to be guidelines, goals, etc. of like you said, what is acceptable and what is not, what is harmful and what is not. I think the best results happen when you have that conversation with your team and you empower your leaders to have that conversation with their teams. Because as we said in the beginning of this, each culture has their own definition of what is rude or what is
Yeah.
kind and how they want to be respected. And that's not a cookie cutter fix.
Mm-hmm.
So I know we're at 40 minutes.
Of course, because that's how we do it.
Right. So I
I
think I want to summarize, and then I know it's your turn to leave them with a question
yes.
of, it's not either or. It's not be a robot or chaos. It's also not be a robot or expect perfection,
Yeah.
because that is inherently not going to work for anybody. So, but I know that you had a question for them.
I have a statement and a question.
Go for it.
What I want people to focus on is I want people to focus on who people are and not what the results that they can provide. So when you focus on people as a leader, you focus on your team, on who they are as people and not what they can produce for you. That's how you lead with authenticity too, right? So it's me being authentic and it's my team being authentic because you want them to do that as well. So that's the one thing I want to say, that we should focus on that. more on who they are as people, as human beings, because again, we lack that a lot nowadays. And the question that I have is that even though it is a buzzword, everybody talks about authenticity, is the workplace ready for authenticity? Or are we just saying that we are so we can fit in and put it on our banner or are we really ready for it to embrace people for who they are and not necessarily, penalize them for voicing their opinions and their ideas, etc.
I don't think that's a buzzword. I think we're recently seeing people use it as a buzzword, but what makes it a buzzword is if you say you're being authentic and then keep doing inauthentic things.
Okay.
So I like your question. And so let's frame it to the audience or I want to frame it to the audience as, think of it as the real behavior. Are we ready for authenticity? The real behaviors that come with that. The mistakes, the differences, the forgiveness it requires, the feedback, and the different ways of approaching process to get to those outcomes.
Sounds good. Well, we'll see everybody next week.
Sounds good.
And have a great week.
Good night.
Yeah.